Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Thomas Morrison always believed he knew his wife better than anyone else in the world. 23 years of marriage build that kind of certainty, a quiet intimacy where you can tell someone's mood by the way they shut the car door or stir their coffee in the morning. Jennifer was predictable in the best possible way, steady, present. They lived in a two-story house in Naperville, a quiet Chicago suburb where streets were named after trees and neighbors greeted each other on weekends. Thomas worked as a senior accountant at a respected firm downtown, waking up at 6 every morning and drinking his black coffee while reading the news on his tablet. Jennifer coordinated corporate events, left home at 8, and usually came back around 6 p.m. They had dinner together, watching a show or talking about their day. Their daughters, Rebecca and Caroline, were grown and living away, one in Boston doing her master's, the other in Denver working at a startup. The house was quiet now, but it was a comfortable, familiar kind of quiet. Or at least it had been, until that weekend in March. Jennifer had planned the retreat months in advance, a spa resort in Wisconsin, 3 days with her sisters. They'd done this once a year ever since their mother passed away 2 years earlier. Thomas saw no issue with it. Rachel, Michelle, and Amanda had always been close to Jennifer, and he liked them. He showed up at family barbecues, birthdays, holidays. When Jennifer left that Friday morning, her small suitcase in the trunk and an excited smile on her face, Thomas kissed her forehead and told her to enjoy herself. He spent the weekend alone doing the things a man does when he's by himself, watched basketball games, ordered pizza, and finally organized the garage he'd been putting off for weeks. It was an ordinary weekend. But when Jennifer came back Sunday night, something was different. Thomas couldn't pinpoint it right away. She looked the same, wore the same clothes, carried the same suitcase. She walked in, dropped her bag in the entryway, hugged him, and said she was tired, that the spa had been wonderful but intense. She took a shower, ate something light, and went to bed early. It was over the next few days that Thomas started noticing little things. Jennifer used to leave her phone anywhere, the kitchen counter, the arm of the couch, the coffee table. Now it was always in her pocket or face down when she set it down. She checked notifications with a new, almost nervous frequency. Whenever Thomas walked into the bedroom and she was on her phone, Jennifer would lock the screen quickly, as if caught doing something wrong, and smile at him with a smile that never reached her eyes. On the Wednesday after her return, during dinner, Thomas casually mentioned he was thinking about getting a new car, maybe something newer. Jennifer barely reacted, just gave a distracted while glancing at the phone next to her plate. He asked if she was even listening. Jennifer looked up, apologized, and said it was work, a difficult client who wouldn't stop messaging. Thomas didn't say anything, but a strange weight settled in his stomach. Jennifer had never been the type to mix work with dinner at home. And then came the Thursdays. The first Thursday after the spa, Jennifer announced at breakfast that she was going out that night with her sisters, just dinner, nothing special, to catch up after the retreat. Thomas thought it was natural. The next week, another Thursday, Jennifer said she was meeting her sisters again, this time for a movie. Thomas raised an eyebrow. 2 Thursdays in a row? Jennifer explained quickly, maybe too quickly, that they were planning a surprise for their dad's birthday in June and needed to coordinate. It made sense, but something about how fast she offered the explanation bothered Thomas. On the third Thursday, when Jennifer came downstairs at 7 p.m. wearing a dress he hadn't seen her wear in months, with noticeable perfume, her hair down and makeup more carefully done than usual, Thomas felt his stomach twist. He was sitting in the living room, pretending to read something on his laptop, but his eyes followed her every move. Jennifer grabbed her purse, checked her phone, and draped a light scarf over her shoulders. As she passed him, she leaned in and kissed his cheek quickly. The perfume was Chanel, the one she saved for special occasions. For a casual dinner among sisters? Thomas asked where they were going to eat. Jennifer answered without looking at him, already with her hand on the doorknob, saying they hadn't decided yet, maybe that new Italian place downtown. He asked for the name. Jennifer hesitated, just half a second, but Thomas noticed. She said she didn't remember the name, that Rachel had suggested it. And she left. Thomas stayed there in the dim living room, laptop open and forgotten, listening to her car pull out of the garage and disappear down the street. He wasn't the kind of man to dwell on suspicions. He wasn't the type to spend weeks gathering evidence, building scenarios in his head, looking for blonde hairs on shirts when his wife was brunette. Thomas was straightforward, he always had been. If something was wrong, he'd find out right away. He wasn't going to live in uncertainty, letting doubt eat away at everything while pretending all was normal. So that night, alone in the empty house, Thomas made a decision. Jennifer came back after midnight, slipping in quietly, thinking he was asleep. But Thomas was awake in his study, already holding the business card of a private investigator, one a coworker had mentioned months earlier during an audit case involving marital fraud. The next morning, a Friday, Thomas called from his office. The voice on the other end was deep, professional, judgment-free. Frank DeLuca, former Chicago police officer, 20 years of experience in private investigations. Thomas explained the situation in dry, factual terms, as if reporting numbers from a financial statement, the change in behavior, the hidden phone, the Thursdays. Frank listened in silence, then simply said, "I can start next Thursday. If there's something, I'll find it. 2 weeks, max." Thomas paid the deposit by bank transfer, hung up, and stared out his office window at the city below, the traffic on Michigan Avenue, people hurrying along the sidewalks, each with their secrets, their lies, their parallel lives. He wondered how many of those people were being betrayed at that very moment without knowing it. How many were living in an illusion as fragile as his own. And for the first time in 23 years, Thomas Morrison wasn't sure of anything. Thomas spent the following week in a strange state of divided awareness. Part of him kept functioning normally, going to the office, reviewing spreadsheets, attending meetings, replying to emails with the usual efficiency built over 2 decades of career. But another part, a hidden layer of his mind, was constantly alert, watching Jennifer with a microscopic attention he'd never shown before. Every gesture was analyzed, every word weighed on an invisible scale. She seemed normal, or at least tried to seem that way. She asked about his work, commented on a difficult client, laughed at some silly joke on TV. But Thomas now saw what he'd once ignored, the way she looked away when he watched her too long, how her answers came either too quickly or too vaguely, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders whenever her phone buzzed. On the following Tuesday, Thomas was in the kitchen making coffee when Jennifer walked in still in her robe, her hair damp from the shower. She grabbed a mug and stood beside him as they waited for the coffee to finish brewing. It was a scene they'd repeated thousands of times over the years, mundane yet intimate. Jennifer made a comment about the weather cooling off over the weekend. Thomas murmured in agreement. Then her phone, sitting on the counter, vibrated. Jennifer snatched it up quickly, glanced at the screen, and Thomas saw her expression shift for a fraction of a second, something between surprise and nervousness. She locked the phone and set it back on the counter, face down. Thomas asked who it was. Jennifer said it was Rachel confirming something for Thursday. Thomas drank his coffee in silence, the hot liquid going down with a bitterness that had nothing to do with the drink itself. Thursday arrived with torturous slowness. Thomas knew Frank DeLuca would be following Jennifer that night, the first real night of investigation. The idea of another man watching his wife, photographing her movements, witnessing whatever she might be doing, filled Thomas with a strange mix of relief and nausea. He wanted the truth, but he also feared what it might reveal. He left for work at 7 a.m. as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. At 5 p.m., unable to concentrate, Thomas left the office early and went home. Jennifer arrived a little after 6, greeted him with an automatic kiss on the cheek, and went upstairs to change. When she came down half an hour later, she was wearing dark jeans and a silk blouse that brought out her eyes. Low heels, discreet earrings. Pretty, but not overdone. Calculated. Jennifer grabbed her keys and announced she was heading out to meet her sisters. Thomas asked where they were eating. She answered vaguely, something about a restaurant Amanda had suggested. He nodded and told her to have fun. She smiled and left. Thomas sat in the dim living room, the TV on some random channel he wasn't really watching, and waited. The phone didn't ring that night. Jennifer came back after midnight, slipped in quietly, and went upstairs. Thomas pretended to sleep but stayed awake until nearly dawn. The next morning, Friday, Thomas got a text from Frank, first night documented. I'll keep following for another week to establish a pattern. I'll let you know when I have something concrete. Thomas read the message 3 times, then deleted it. The wait would be longer than he'd imagined. The following days were a torture of forced normalcy. Thomas went to work, came home, had dinner with Jennifer, watched TV. She casually mentioned that next Thursday she'd probably go out with her sisters again. Thomas just nodded. On Sunday, they went to the grocery store together, pushing the cart through the aisles, picking out fruit and bread like any ordinary couple. Thomas watched Jennifer take items off the shelves and wondered who this woman beside him really was. The second Thursday arrived. Jennifer went out again, same excuse, same careful preparation. Thomas stayed home, every minute dragging like an eternity. This time, he couldn't even pretend to care about the TV. He walked around the house, went up to his study, back down to the kitchen, sat on the porch watching the empty suburban street. At 11:50 p.m., his phone buzzed. A message from Frank, got what you need. Same cafe tomorrow, 9 a.m. Thomas's heart raced. He replied only, okay, and stared at his phone screen until it went dark. Jennifer came home just after midnight. Thomas lay in the dark bedroom, eyes open, listening to her move quietly through the bathroom, then slip into bed beside him. Her breathing evened out within minutes. She slept peacefully while Thomas stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling. Friday morning, Thomas told Jennifer he had an early meeting and left before she was fully awake. The cafe on State Street was nearly empty when he arrived at 9 sharp. Frank was already there, sitting at a table in the back, a large brown folder on the chair beside him. He was a man in his 50s, gray hair cut short, with the look of someone who'd seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. But when he looked at Thomas, there was something in his eyes that resembled compassion. Thomas sat down and ordered a coffee he knew he wouldn't be able to drink. Frank took a deep breath before speaking. Thomas, 2 Thursdays in a row. Same pattern. I need you to brace yourself, because it's not just your wife. He slid the folder to the center of the table. Thomas opened it with slightly trembling fingers. The first photos showed the Lakeside Inn, a discreet boutique hotel with a red brick facade. Then came sequences from the first Thursday, Jennifer arriving at 7:42 p.m., entering the lobby. 10 minutes later, Rachel appeared in the images. 15 minutes after Rachel, Michelle showed up. 20 minutes after Michelle, Amanda completed the group. Thomas looked at Frank, confused. All the sisters, he managed to say. Frank nodded gravely and turned to the photos from the second Thursday. Same hotel. Same time intervals. Jennifer at 7:45 p.m. Rachel 10 minutes later. Michelle 15 minutes after Rachel. Amanda closing the sequence 20 minutes after that. It's like clockwork, Frank said quietly. This isn't impulsive, Thomas. It's organized. Planned. They have a routine. Now there were more photos. Men arriving separately on both nights, one in a gray suit for Jennifer, an athletic type for Rachel, an older man for Michelle, a younger guy for Amanda. Frank had documented everything, 2 Thursdays proving the pattern. And then came the most painful shots, around midnight on both Thursdays, all 4 sisters walking out together, heading to the parking lot, chatting, even laughing. Like friends returning from a pleasant social event. Frank slid a USB drive across the table. There are videos on here. And audio I managed to capture in the parking lot. In one conversation, you can hear them coordinating the stories they'll tell at home. It's coordinated, Thomas. They cover for each other. Thomas held the USB drive, the small piece of plastic weighing tons, in his hand. He flipped through the photos again, as if looking more times could change what they showed. Frank continued, his voice professional but not devoid of empathy. Given the level of organization and how naturally they move, this doesn't seem recent. It's been going on for a while. Exactly how long, I can't say without more investigation, but the operation is too sophisticated to be new. Thomas nodded mechanically. It didn't matter if it had been weeks, months, or years. The point was the conspiracy, the web of lies, for sisters turning betrayal into a group activity. Thomas asked how much he owed. Frank named the final amount. Thomas paid in cash right there, tucked the folder and USB drive into a backpack he'd brought, shook Frank's hand, thanked him in a voice he barely recognized as his own, and stepped out into the harsh April morning light in Chicago. He walked aimlessly through downtown streets for over an hour, the backpack heavy on his shoulder, processing not just Jennifer's betrayal but the magnitude of this family scheme. It wasn't just an affair. It was a structure, an alliance, for women covering for each other, using blood ties to facilitate infidelity. And Thomas knew, with a cold certainty that seeped into every cell of his body, that he wouldn't just confront Jennifer. He'd dismantle the whole operation. Thomas left the downtown cafe with the folder and USB drive, the weight of the evidence pressing down on him like lead. He wandered the streets for nearly an hour, absorbing not only Jennifer's betrayal but the full scale of this familial conspiracy. For sisters, for deceived husbands, an organized, meticulous scheme that turned infidelity into a group activity. By the time he finally returned to Naperville, it was already mid-afternoon. Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing something for dinner, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. She smiled when he walked in. "Hey, love. How was the meeting?" Thomas forced a smile. "Productive. Very productive." He went straight up to his study, locked the door, and started watching the videos. The footage was devastating in its clarity. The four sisters laughing in the parking lot, coordinating stories, covering for each other. Thomas watched every second, every frame, letting his anger harden inside him like concrete. There would be no forgiveness. No second chances. No private conversations where Jennifer could cry and manipulate him. This needed to be public. It needed to be devastating. And it needed to involve everyone who'd been deceived. He spent all of Saturday locked in his study, telling Jennifer he was dealing with urgent work issues. She accepted it without question, and that ease with which she believed lies, because she lived by them, made Thomas clench his fists. During that Saturday, he planned every detail with surgical precision. At dinner that night, Thomas casually mentioned, "I was thinking of having lunch tomorrow. It's been a while since we got your whole family together." Jennifer looked up, surprised. "Tomorrow? Sunday?" Thomas nodded, keeping his tone light. "Yeah. Nothing fancy. Just a simple backyard barbecue. Invite your sisters and brothers-in-law. Noon." Jennifer seemed genuinely pleased. "What a nice surprise. They'll love it. Let me text them now." She picked up her phone and started typing in the sisters' group chat. Thomas watched every move, every smile as replies came in. They all accepted immediately. Rachel sent excited emojis. Michelle said she'd bring a pie. Amanda asked if she should bring anything. Jennifer looked at Thomas with that smile he'd known for 23 years. "Done. Everyone's in. What a great idea, honey." Thomas just nodded and went back to eating, each bite struggling down his throat. Sunday dawned with a perfect blue sky, one of those April days that trick you with promises of summer. Thomas woke at 6 while Jennifer was still asleep. He went downstairs, made coffee, and began setting the stage. In the backyard, he set up the grill, put beers on ice, arranged chairs as if it were truly a relaxed family lunch. But inside the house, in the living room, he prepared the real stage. He connected his laptop to the 65-inch TV, loaded the videos and photos onto the system, tested the sound, and put the remote in his pocket. He double-checked everything 3 times. There could be no technical glitches. At 10 a.m., Jennifer came downstairs in a light floral dress. "Need any help with anything?" Thomas shook his head. "No. I've got it all. You just relax." She kissed his cheek and went to set the outdoor table. Guests started arriving right at noon. Rachel and Kevin were first. She brought a bottle of white wine. He greeted Thomas with a firm handshake. Michelle and Brandon arrived 5 minutes later. She carried a covered casserole dish. Amanda and Scott rounded out the group, bringing craft beers. The 4 sisters hugged effusively, as they always did. That intimacy Thomas now saw in a new light. The men greeted each other, chatting about sports and work. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Thomas lit the grill, offered drinks, played the perfect host. Jennifer moved among the guests, smiling, serving snacks. The sisters laughed at some inside joke. It was the picture of family harmony. After 20 minutes of casual conversation in the yard, Thomas wiped his hands on a towel and said loudly, "Everyone, before we start grilling, I need to show you something inside. It'll be quick." His tone was light, casual. Jennifer looked at him curiously. "Show what?" Thomas just smiled. "Come on, everyone. It's important." He started walking toward the house. The guests exchanged glances but followed him. Rachel joked about him being mysterious. Michelle laughed. They entered through the sliding door into the living room. Thomas gestured to the large sofa and armchairs. "Have a seat. It'll only take a few minutes." They settled in, still relaxed, suspecting nothing. Kevin cracked a joke about it being a work slideshow. Brandon chuckled. Thomas picked up the remote and turned on the TV. The screen lit up with his computer desktop. He looked at the 4 sisters seated there, Jennifer on the sofa, Rachel in an armchair, Michelle and Amanda in chairs he'd brought in. The 3 husbands were scattered among them. No one understood what was happening. Thomas took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, I started noticing changes in Jennifer's behavior. Hidden phone. Going out every Thursday night. So last Friday, I hired a private investigator. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Jennifer went pale. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Thomas saw panic begin to settle on all 4 sisters' faces. Before any of them could speak, Thomas hit play. The TV showed the first photo, the lakeside inn, red brick facade. Then the sequence, Jennifer entering. Rachel 10 minutes later. Michelle 15 minutes after that. Amanda completing the group. Clear timestamps on every image. The silence in the room was deafening. Kevin leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. What is this?" Brandon looked at Michelle, who had her hands over her mouth. Scott was pale, staring at Amanda as if seeing her for the first time. Thomas continued, his voice icy and controlled. "This happens every Thursday night. 4 months. While you 3 thought your wives were at dinners, book clubs, or charity events, they were here. At this hotel. With other men." The next set of photos showed the lovers arriving, clear faces, no ambiguity. Thomas identified each one. "This is Jennifer's guy. This is Rachel's. This is Michelle's. And this is Amanda's." Jennifer stood up unsteadily. "Thomas, stop this. You can't, he cut her off with a voice sharp as a blade. Can't what? Show the truth? Sit down. Jennifer remained standing, trembling. Rachel began crying silently. Michelle was frozen, eyes locked on the screen in absolute shock. Amanda tried to stand, but Scott gripped her arm tightly. You sit and watch, he said, his voice low but filled with a rage Thomas recognized because it was the same he felt. Thomas played the first video. The four sisters leaving the hotel around midnight, walking together to the parking lot. The audio was loud. They were laughing, chatting. Rachel saying something like, "Same time next week." Michelle commenting they needed to coordinate their stories better. The audio kept going, and then came the part Thomas knew would be devastating. Amanda said, "My husband doesn't even question me anymore. It's way too easy." The others laughed. Jennifer replied, "Thomas doesn't either. He trusts so much it's almost pathetic." The word pathetic echoed through the room like a gunshot. Kevin suddenly stood up, his chair crashing backward with a thud. "What did you do?" He stared at Rachel with disbelief and fury. Rachel tried to speak, but only sobs came out. Brandon was on his feet now too, pointing at the screen. "How many times? How many times, Michelle?" Michelle finally found her voice, thin and broken. "Brandon, I can explain," he cut her off. "Explain? You're on video. Laughing. Calling us idiots." Amanda tried to approach Scott, but he recoiled as if she were radioactive. "Don't touch me." Jennifer finally exploded, turning to Thomas with fire in her eyes despite her tears. "You had no right to do this. To expose us like this in front of everyone. This is between us, between couples." Thomas stepped toward her, and when he spoke, each word was measured, calculated to cut deep. "Between couples? Jennifer, you destroyed that idea of between couples when you made a family pact of betrayal. You turned this into a group project. Weekly infidelity meetings. You used your sisterhood to make lying easier. So no, this isn't private anymore. This is a scheme involving 4 families." Rachel stood up, her legs wobbling, then simply collapsed. She fainted, her body falling sideways. Kevin lunged to catch her before she hit the coffee table, but his face showed more reflex than genuine concern. "Someone get water," he said, his voice mechanical. Michelle ran to the kitchen and came back with a glass. Rachel came to within seconds, groaning, disoriented. When she realized where she was and what had happened, she started crying again, this time with violent sobs that shook her whole body. Amanda was hunched in her chair, clutching her stomach, rocking back and forth. Michelle had her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Jennifer remained standing, looking at Thomas with a mix of hatred, shame, and desperation. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "Me? I ruined everything? Jennifer, you 4 ruined everything the first time you walked into that hotel. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see." Rachel tried to stand again, but her legs wouldn't hold. Michelle finally lowered her hands and said in a choked voice, "We did this for Mom." Because she lived unhappily her whole life, Kevin interrupted her with a voice Thomas never imagined the quiet, reserved accountant could have. "Don't use your dead mother as an excuse for this. Don't insult her memory like that." Michelle shrank as if slapped. Jennifer took a step toward Thomas. "How long have you been planning this? This public humiliation?" Thomas looked her in the eyes. 2 days. Since I found out last Friday. And you know why so fast? Because I didn't need time to be sure. The evidence was clear. Unlike you 4, who spent months planning every lie. Amanda finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "Scott, I'm so sorry. I know it means nothing now, but," Scott cut her off. You're right. It means nothing. He turned to Thomas. Can I get a copy of this today? Thomas nodded. I'll email it to you in an hour. The room then erupted into overlapping conversations. Kevin and Rachel in a heated argument where he kept asking, how long, and she just cried. Brandon and Michelle exchanging accusations, he demanding to know about every Thursday for months, she trying and failing to explain. Scott and Amanda in heavy silence, he turned away from her, she reached for his shoulder and he pulled back. And Thomas and Jennifer, staring at each other across the ruined room, 23 years of marriage crumbling around them. Kevin was the first to leave. He looked at Rachel and said simply, I'm leaving. Pack your things and get out of my house today. Today, Rachel. She tried to protest, but he was already out the door. Brandon followed soon after, telling Michelle, we'll talk to lawyers. Don't come back home. Michelle collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. Scott was the last of the three to leave, but before stepping out, he looked at Amanda and said something that made her whimper in pain, I truly loved you. And you turned it into a joke to tell your sisters. And he left. Only the four sisters and Thomas remained in the living room. Jennifer looked at her sisters, then at Thomas. Are you satisfied now? You've destroyed 4 families at once? Thomas walked until he stood right in front of her. I didn't destroy anything, Jennifer. You'd already destroyed it all. I just showed everyone the rubble. He pointed to the door. Now pack your things and get out of my house. Today. Now. Jennifer tried to argue, but Thomas raised his voice for the first time. Get out of my house. The shout made all 4 sisters jump. Jennifer ran upstairs, the other 3 following. Thomas heard the chaos upstairs, drawers opening, clothes tossed into suitcases. 20 minutes later, they came down. Jennifer with 2 large suitcases. The others carrying their bags. At the door, Jennifer turned one last time. Where am I supposed to go? Thomas looked at her with no emotion on his face. Not my problem. Maybe the Lakeside Inn. You all know the place well. The word struck like a whip. The 4 sisters left, got into their cars parked out front. Thomas watched from the window. They sat in their cars for nearly 10 minutes, probably crying, probably trying to decide what to do. Then, one by one, the cars pulled away. And Thomas was left alone in the empty house, the barbecue cooling in the yard, the beers melting in the ice, the remnants of a family gathering that never happened. That night, as Thomas put away the backyard chairs and extinguished the unused grill, he thought about the 4 sisters. He imagined where they might be. Whether they'd be together. And then, with an irony he didn't miss, he realized they probably were. Probably exactly where they'd always been on Thursdays. At the Lakeside Inn. But this time not in separate rooms with lovers. This time all together, with nowhere to go, crying over the marriages they destroyed with their own pact. The hotel that hosted their betrayals would now witness their downfall. And Thomas, for the first time in weeks, slept through the night. Monday morning, Thomas woke early as usual, but the house felt different. It wasn't just the silence, there'd always been silence since the girls moved out. It was the quality of the silence. There was no tension in the air anymore, no feeling of walking on broken glass. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks ate breakfast without a knot in his stomach. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Kevin. Thomas, thanks for yesterday. It hurt, but it needed to happen. Rachel didn't come home. I changed the locks this morning. My lawyer's already preparing the papers. Thomas replied only, did what needed to be done. Good luck with everything. Minutes later, another message, this time from Brandon, never thought Michelle was capable of this. I'm devastated, but also relieved to know the truth. Thanks for having the courage to expose it. And finally Scott, Amanda tried calling me 23 times last night. Blocked the number. Divorce papers will be filed this week. Thomas put his phone away and thought of the three men, each dealing with the same pain he was, each having to rebuild a life they thought was solid but turned out to be built on quicksand. But at least now they knew the truth. They were no longer living in illusion. At 10 a.m., Thomas called the office and requested a week off. Needed to sort things out, he told his supervisor, urgent personal matters. Approved without question, he had 3 unused weeks saved up. On Tuesday, Thomas went to a law firm downtown, one of the best in the city specializing in complex divorces. The attorney, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Hoffman, listened to the whole story without interrupting, her eyes widening more with each piece of evidence Thomas showed her from Frank's investigation. "Mr. Morrison," she said when he finished, "in 27 years of practice, I've never seen anything so organized. This isn't a simple infidelity case. It's a family conspiracy." Thomas nodded. "I know. And I want that made clear in the proceedings. I don't want settlement. I don't want mediation. I want a straight divorce, and I want the reasons documented." Patricia took notes. "With this evidence, you have a solid case. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but this will still matter for asset division and possible alimony issues." "She might try to claim she's entitled to," Thomas interrupted her. "She works. She earns well. We built assets together, I know they'll be split. I don't care about that. I just want it recorded why. So when our daughters read the documents, there's no doubt what their mother did." That afternoon, as Patricia began preparing the paperwork, Thomas got an unexpected call. It was Gerald Morrison, Jennifer's father and the father of the other 3 sisters, a 72-year-old man Thomas had always respected. "Thomas," the old man's voice was choked, "Jennifer told me what happened. Or at least her version. Then I called Kevin, Brandon, Scott. Each told me the same story. Son, I have no words." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry you have to go through this." Gerald let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "You're sorry? Thomas, you were betrayed and you're apologizing to me? What kind of man are you?" He paused. "My wife, their mother, they're using her as an excuse. Saying they did this for her because she was unhappy." Thomas closed his eyes. "I know. Jennifer mentioned that." Gerald continued, his voice firmer now, angrier. "My Helen wasn't unhappy. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. She chose our life together. Were there hard times? Sure. What marriage doesn't have them? But she loved me and I loved her. And now my daughters have taken her memory and twisted it to justify this." He took a deep breath. "Thomas, I want you to know you'll always be my son-in-law. You'll always be welcome in my home. And the girls, Jennifer, Rachel, Michelle, Amanda, they're not welcome until they understand the gravity of what they've done." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." On Thursday, exactly 1 week after their last meeting at the hotel, Thomas was in his home office when the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he answered. The voice on the other end was young, female, nervous. "Mr. Morrison? My name is Amanda, not the Amanda from your family. I'm the manager at the Lakeside Inn." Thomas sat up straight. "Yes?" The woman hesitated. "Look, I shouldn't be calling, but, the 4 women from the photos, they've been staying here since Sunday. All in the same room. They seem destroyed. And today one of them, the blonde, Rachel I think, she had a collapse in the lobby earlier. We had to call paramedics." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest, but it wasn't concern. It was just acknowledgement that actions have consequences. Why are you calling me? Amanda, the manager, sighed. Because the bill's been unpaid for 5 days. They can't pay. Their cards were all declined. And when I asked for ID, I realized who they were. I remembered the photos that went around. Anyway, I thought you should know. Thomas thought for a moment. How much is the bill? She named the amount. Thomas said, I'll pay. But only for 2 more nights. After that, they have to leave. And I don't want them to know I paid. Understood? The manager agreed, relieved. Thomas hung up and stared at his phone. He wasn't doing this for Jennifer. He was doing it because he still had dignity, still had compassion, even when directed at those who didn't deserve it. But that was all. Just that and nothing more. Days turned into weeks. Thomas sold the house in Naperville, too many memories, too many ghosts in every room. He bought a modern apartment downtown Chicago, 18th floor with a view of Lake Michigan, a place where everything was new, where nothing smelled like Jennifer. His daughters, Rebecca and Caroline, flew home when he told them the truth. Their reaction was shock, then fury at their mother, then deep sadness. How could she? Rebecca asked, tears streaming down her face. How could she do this to you? To us? Thomas hugged both daughters. They were adults now, but in that moment they seemed like children again. People make choices, he said simply. And sometimes those choices reveal who they really are. The girls stood by him without hesitation. Jennifer tried calling them, texting them. They didn't respond. 2 months after the Sunday that changed everything, Thomas was in his new apartment organizing books on a shelf when the intercom rang. It was a courier with a registered letter. Inside were papers from Jennifer's lawyer. She was contesting the divorce, requesting mediation, claiming Thomas had publicly exposed her and caused extreme emotional distress. Thomas read the letter, handed it to Patricia, and said only, respond denying everything. And speed up the process. Patricia smiled. With pleasure. The following week, Thomas learned through Kevin that the 4 sisters had finally left the Lakeside Inn, but they weren't together anymore. Rachel had moved in with a cousin in Indiana. Michelle was staying at her parents' house, though Gerald had made it clear it was temporary. Amanda had rented a tiny apartment on Chicago's outskirts. And Jennifer. Jennifer was in a small flat in Evanston, alone, working but completely socially isolated. The pact had unraveled. The sisters weren't even speaking anymore, each blaming the others, each drowning in their own shame. Thomas began rebuilding his life methodically. Gym every morning. Work during the day. Dinners with friends he'd neglected in the last years of his marriage. One weekend, he flew to Boston to visit Rebecca. The next, to Denver to see Caroline. He started traveling, something Jennifer had always refused to do. He went to the Grand Canyon, to Yellowstone, to places he'd only seen in photos. And in each place, he felt pieces of himself being reassembled, his dignity restored brick by brick. 6 months after the confrontation, on a Thursday night, the irony wasn't lost on him. Thomas was dining alone at a sophisticated Italian restaurant downtown Chicago. He had a book open beside his plate, an excellent red wine, and was genuinely enjoying his meal. That's when he saw Jennifer across the restaurant. She was with someone, a man Thomas didn't recognize, not one of the lovers from the photos. She looked different, thinner, shorter hair, less polished clothes. She saw him at the same moment. Their eyes met across the room. Thomas saw the shock in her, saw her swallow hard, saw her hands tremble. The man with her said something, she replied without taking her eyes off Thomas. Then something unexpected happened. Jennifer stood up and walked to his table. Thomas set his book aside and waited. She stopped a meter away, hands clasped in front of her. Thomas. Her voice was small, tired. Jennifer. He kept his tone neutral. She looked at the book, the wine, the half-finished plate. You look, well. Thomas nodded. I am well. A heavy silence. Then Jennifer said, her voice breaking, I ruined everything, didn't I? Thomas took a sip of wine before answering. Yes. You did. Jennifer bit her lip. The girls won't talk to me. My dad barely speaks to me. My sisters, we don't talk anymore. Everyone blames everyone else. I've lost my marriage, my family, my reputation. Everything. Thomas set his glass down. And why are you telling me this? She stared at him, tears in her eyes. Because I wanted you to know that I understand now. That I've paid. He interrupted her, voice low but firm. Jennifer, you're not paying. You're living with the consequences of your choices. There's a difference. And as for me knowing, I don't need to know. I don't care anymore. The words hit her like a punch. You don't care? Thomas shook his head. No. I cared for 23 years. I cared when you were cheating on me. I cared when I found out. I cared when I had to destroy the illusion of our life together. But now? Now you're a stranger I used to know. Jennifer stepped back as if pushed. Tears streamed freely now. I still love you, she whispered. Thomas smiled, but there was no cruelty in it. Only sadness. No, you don't. You never did. You loved the security, the comfort, the image. But love? Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't conspire. Love doesn't laugh with your sisters about how easy it is to fool your pathetic husband. He paused. Now, please go back to your table. I was enjoying my dinner alone. Jennifer stood there a few more seconds, then turned and walked shakily back to her table. The man with her asked something, she just shook her head. 5 minutes later, they left the restaurant. Thomas watched them pass the window, Jennifer glancing back one last time. He was already reading his book again. The following Thursday, because Thomas had deliberately decided to make Thursdays his special day, he was in his new apartment with Rebecca and Caroline, who'd come to visit together. They made homemade pizza, watched a bad movie, laughed at inside jokes. And at one point, Rebecca said, Dad, I'm proud of you. Of how you handled everything. You didn't become bitter. You didn't turn into an angry man. You just moved on. Thomas looked at his 2 daughters, now strong, independent women, and felt gratitude. I learned something, he said. Dignity doesn't come from forgiving the unforgivable. It comes from knowing when to walk away and not look back. Caroline raised her soda. To dignity, then. The 3 of them clinked glasses. A year after the Sunday that changed everything, Thomas was fully settled into his new life. The divorce had been finalized, Jennifer received nothing beyond the legal division of assets, no alimony, no extra settlement. The documents made the reason very clear: sustained, premeditated marital infidelity. Kevin, Brandon, and Scott had also finalized their divorces. The 4 men occasionally met for dinner, an unplanned fraternity of survivors. They didn't talk about their ex-wives. They talked about work, hobbies, future plans. Of the 4 Morrison sisters, Thomas knew little. Rachel had moved permanently to Indiana. Michelle was trying to rebuild her relationship with her father, with little success. Amanda had lost her job and was working something less prestigious. And Jennifer. Jennifer remained in Evanston, invisible, irrelevant. The Morrison Sisters Pact became a whispered story in Naperville social circles, a cautionary urban legend about how shared lies, even among family, eventually collapse under the weight of truth. And Thomas Morrison, the Chicago accountant who exposed it all on an April Sunday, became a symbol of something many couldn't quite name. It wasn't revenge, he hadn't destroyed anything that wasn't already broken. It wasn't cruelty, he'd only illuminated the truth. It was something simpler and deeper, the refusal to live a lie. The choice of dignity over comfort. The courage to accept that sometimes loving yourself means letting go of the one you loved most. And on a Thursday night, a year and a half later, Thomas stood on his apartment balcony, looking out at Lake Michigan reflecting the city lights, a glass of wine in hand, completely alone but in no way lonely. And he realized that maybe this was the biggest difference between him and Jennifer. She sought freedom through lies and found prison. He accepted the truth and found liberation. And Thomas Morrison finally understood that true dignity doesn't come from how much pain you can inflict on those who hurt you, but from how much peace you can find walking away from them with your head held high. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.